Hello everyone, and welcome to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. My name is Irene, and today we're going to be talking about every objective in Wild Rift, giving you guys an in-depth guide on how to go about taking them in the smartest ways possible, and of course, explaining the best ways to use these objectives once you've secured them. But before we get into that, it's time for our question of the day. Which objective do you find yourselves always wanting to go for? Now personally, I always find myself wanting to get the Rift Herald. Now I know in early parts of the game, it isn't worth as much as a turret. But a turret, it's always a turret. But a Rift Herald could get you anything. It could even get you a turret. But let me know your favorite objective in the comments below. Now, let's get into the video. Let's start off by listing the objectives and ordering them from least important to most important. There are jungle camps, both yours and the enemy's, the neutral Scuttle Crab, the red and blue buffs, Rift Herald, elemental drakes, turrets, Elder Dragon, and then Baron Nashor. I'll explain the reasoning for the placement of each of these objectives as we go through them, but just like how we ranked these, this will also be the order in which we'll be talking about them. So let's start with the jungle camps. The jungle camps are primarily the resource that junglers use, but as the game progresses, they should also be on your mind regardless of which lane you're playing. Whether it's defending your own jungle camps while you're behind, or advancing your vision into the enemy's jungle, everyone needs to play around jungle camps to some degree. If you're able to see what camps are up or down in the enemy jungle, you'll help your team begin to track the enemy jungler and make it less likely for his ganks to succeed if you can locate where he's at. Remember that knowing where a jungler isn't is also useful, because you can then deduce where he is likely to be based on what information you have. Not only are jungle camps a great resource in general to pick up and secure on your side, when you take them away from the enemy jungler, you force them to do something different to keep up their pace. They have to invade your jungle, gank, or they just have to take the L. Remember to cycle the enemy's jungle camps in games that you're winning and clear them out in the late game to help prevent any potential comeback. The fact you can take away their gold and put it into your pockets is an incredibly strong move that shouldn't be taken lightly. The best way to go about taking enemy jungle camps is as follows. You should invade when the nearest lane to the jungle has priority and is shoving, or you've just spotted the enemy jungler on the opposite side of the map. This is the perfect time to set up wards, take camps in the mid game, and move out. Early on in the game, junglers should be the only ones really taking the jungle camps from each other with the help of their team, but as the game progresses, fed Baron laners should be looking to take the nearby camps, and the same goes for the mid laner. I don't really recommend doing this early because you'll put yourself at substantial risk staying in the enemy jungle for so long without any cover. Now let's talk about the Scuttle Crab. This little guy hangs out in the river near the Baron and Dragon pits, and when killed, the Scuttle Crab gives the team that killed it vision of the area in front of the corresponding objective pit, and also a movement speed shrine. This doesn't last forever, of course, but is quite an underrated objective to take at all points of the game. Securing Scuttle Crabs early on for your jungler and denying the enemy jungler the golden experience from the camp is a small play that goes a long way. If you ever want to hamstring a jungler from getting off the ground, early on, you should be helping your jungler at the very first Scuttle Crab and check up on that objective as frequently as possible, especially if you have a good skirmishing champion. Not only will you be helping your jungler to get ahead, you'll also be helping yourself out with some extra vision near your lane that you don't have to dedicate a ward to get. Another really powerful thing to do with the Scuttle Crab is to pick it up before the objective near it spawns, even if you're the team that's behind. This vision isn't something that can be swept or removed by the enemy team, and it will make average players less likely to do the objective while the vision and speed shrines are up. If they do end up going for it, you'll have full vision of their assault on the objective and can plan your own, or make a play on the opposite side of the map. Regardless, the early game is really where the Scuttle Crab shines, so help your junglers help you and play for those early scuttles. Alright, so our first two objectives are small and not usually on most people's lists of what they would call an objective. But next, we have one of the first ones that people think of when they hear the word objective, and that's the red and the blue buffs. The blue buff is a golem that when slain, gives a buff that gives bonus mana and energy regeneration. This is an objective that junglers should take for themselves early on, but then should be handing off to any mages on their team after that. The reason for this is, if the enemy mid laner isn't getting blue buffs, then you're giving your mid laner a massive advantage and staying power in lane while they spam their abilities. If the enemy mid laner is getting their blue buff handed off to them, you don't want to leave your own mid laner there dry, having to compete against someone with infinite spell slinging ability. The blue buff is something you can also look to ward and contest early on to swing the game into your favor. If you find the enemy jungler hanging out on the other side of the map and not watching their timers, a quick yoink goes a long way to shut down pesky mid laners. The best way to be utilizing the first blue buff is to begin using its power to just get through the jungle as quickly as possible if you're the jungler. And if you're a laner getting one later in the game, you should be shoving your lane and either pressuring the turret, poking the enemy down, or rotating to an objective in the river using your push advantage. The red buff is the other buff on the rift that sits in the jungle. When killed, it gives your attacks a slow and bonus true damage. This buff is incredibly strong, and most noticeable in the early parts of the game when given to the junglers who have gap closers and can begin slowing their enemies with their basic attacks. Ranged champions also benefit from this buff and should be the ones picking it up in the late game instead of the jungler. It's really helpful for kiting their enemies backwards and slowing them, or allowing them to continue attacking their opponent while chasing them down. This buff should be utilized almost as soon as you pick it up. If you find yourself picking up this buff and then just clearing your jungle more, you're wasting some of the uptime of the buff instead of threatening the enemy and potentially helping your team. In the mid game, if you're planning on picking up your red buff, just kill all the small camps around it first and then pick it up when you want to make a play. Those camps will come up sooner, and you'll also not waste any time on the buff sitting in your jungle. Okay, so now we're at the Rift Herald. This beauty spawns in the Baron Pit early on in the game and isn't that hard to deal with. It's big, burly, and kinda dumb. You want to kite it around, avoid its attacks by walking around it, and eventually finishing it off, and picking up the buff that it drops. This buff can be picked up by any player on the team that killed the Rift Herald and can be used to enhance any assault your team makes. When you throw down the buff, the Rift Herald will spawn as an ally and begin to charge down the nearest lane, killing any minions, and then preparing itself for a massive charge, slamming itself into the enemy turret, and dealing massive amounts of damage. This is an easy way to convert this objective into gold for your team, and break a few of the enemy's turret plates. The power of a good Rift Herald that is timed as the enemy recalls shouldn't be underestimated. There's a lot of players that never end up contesting this buff, and it's really easy to take as it doesn't do much damage to you in comparison to the Baron or any of the dragons. The amount of risk versus reward that is associated with the Rift Herald is mild risk with a really high variance reward. Sometimes you just can't find a good place to put the Rift Herald down and end up not being able to use it well, if at all. Sending the Rift Herald into the enemy team that's just waiting for it isn't really the best of plays. You either want to use the Rift Herald to finish off a turret with the true damage charge, get early game gold and plates while the enemy laner has recalled, or use it as another body to send in while your team looks to dive. Good Rift Herald usage is something you're going to have to work on, and as your game sense improves, you'll start to figure out the best times to use it. It's okay though if you mess up. We've all had those times we've just sent Shelly down a lane, straight to her doom. Good night, sweet prince. A quick tip is that you should always prioritize using the Rift Herald on the mid lane turret if it would kill the turret. The mid lane turret is typically the hardest turret to take due to the fact that most wave clear in the game usually sits there, and that you can be ganked from either side of the lane if you push up. So if there is an open opportunity to take a turret with it, I highly recommend doing that and freeing up your mid laner to help out the side lanes. Alright, now we're on to the big boys, the Elemental Drakes. These are the most contested objectives in the game, as they spawn near the dragon lane and are a hotbed of activity throughout all stages of the game. Spawning early on and having a random element associated with them, these drakes range in power from giving increased movement speed, damage, health, or omnivamp. There are some drakes you'll want to prioritize over others, but generally, they are all incredibly good. Mountain Drake is usually the least important in most people's minds, followed by Cloud, Infernal, and Ocean Drake. The latter three are all really close in power, and as you better learn to use the Cloud Drake's movement speed to move around the map, it makes all three of these drakes even more appealing. So let's talk about how to get these drakes. I first want to emphasize that securing drakes for your team and keeping vision of the pit is a full team-wide responsibility. No, this is not just the dragon laner's domain. Junglers, mid laners, and even Baron laners should always keep an eye out for a chance to ward around the objective before it's up, or roam down to join your team for a potential dragon take. Another really good rule of thumb for taking drakes is, if you have to ward it as it spawns, you're warding it too late. Around 1 minute before a drake spawns, you'll want to begin setting up the objective. Warding, recalling, and spending all of your gold so that you are as strong as you can be for a fight if it does happen. You don't want to be getting caught off guard by a drake spawn or the enemy team who prepares for it. When looking to contest a drake, you want to fight the enemy team when they are weakest. This is typically something you can pick up on in 3 ways. The first is just a numbers game. If you see that your team has more people there and that they haven't sent everyone to the dragon on the enemy team. The second is if you see them using basic abilities on the drake to try and deal damage to it and get it down. If they're using abilities on the Drake to kill it, then they won't have those abilities to deal damage to you. And this is something that you should definitely use to your advantage. And the third is to look and see if the enemy team has put themselves in any kind of disadvantage. Whether this is not spending their gold and having very few items in their inventory, or maybe they've grouped up in a way where you can get a great area of effect engage, or they've taken a lot of damage from your team's poke, the dragon, or maybe even both. Now let's briefly talk about turrets. These guys are high up on this list, not just because of the fact that you need to kill turrets in order to end the game. They provide a large amount of gold for you and your team, and they most importantly allow you to move up and control more of the map. Turrets are the bastions of the enemy's area of influence. If you kill a turret, you weaken their position on the map. They'll have to cover more area with the same amount of wards available, and that just isn't physically possible to do. So this means there will be more opportunities to catch your opponents in the jungle or in rotation. Now the best way to go about taking turrets is by creating a numbers advantage and forcing a dive. You'll want to set up a slow push, stack a wave, and have your jungler or mid laner come to help finish the enemy champions that may be hugging the turret. Sometimes you may not even have to dive, and just force the enemy to back off if they wish to not gamble their lives. A great thing about turrets is that the damage you deal to them sticks, so you don't need to get greedy when it comes to turret plates or turret damage in general. Any damage you deal to the turrets at any stage of the game without getting hurt or punished in return is always going to be valuable and potentially useful in the future when you don't have to spend as much time taking that turret down. Also, enemies sometimes hang out under turrets that are very close to dying, and that just makes the dive that much easier to execute if you can finish the turret off before engaging. I listed the Elder Dragon in the priority list after turrets, but before Baron, and this is where the fun really begins. Objectives aren't always black and white in terms of which you should be taking at what time. Sometimes it's best to go for the enemy base turrets instead of the Elder Dragon, or to go for the Elder Dragon instead of the Baron. It all depends on the situation that you're in at the time, and refining these calls is something that just takes practice. Always try to maximize what you can get without risking too much. Once the threshold of risk reaches a certain level, it doesn't really become worth it to go after that objective anymore at the present time. So when it comes to the Elder Dragon, I'm gonna keep it brief. Approach this objective the same way you would an Elemental Dragon, but set up for it a minute and a half before it comes up. And when beginning to set up for it, you'll want to shove all of the lanes in. Baron, Dragon, and mid lane should be shoved in, and the enemy jungle needs to be warded before any attempt is made. It's better to kill the enemy team and end the game than it is to kill an Elder Dragon. So if you can use it as bait and ambush the desperate enemy champions, that's a better use of this objective than anything else you could get with it, especially if taking it risks it being stolen away by a smite. And speaking of smite steals, our last objective is the Baron. This guy is what most people feel the entire mid-game is about. The Baron Dance is a very popular term for how all of the activity seems to begin revolving around this objective as teams posture to either fight, ward, steal, or shove the lanes around it. When going for a Baron, you should always assess the risk. Warding decreases this risk, killing enemy champions decreases it further, and acing the enemy team eliminates it altogether. The Baron is either your reward for winning a fight, or the loot you get from setting up vision and sneaking it or stealing it away. When setting up for the Baron, you'll want to take stock of everything on the map and especially what your team composition wants to do. Visualize what the perfect team fight for your team would look like and try to play around getting that. If your team isn't suited for diving into the enemies and killing them, but more so wants to poke and soften up the enemy team, then you'll want to actually be the team arriving at the Baron second. You'll still want vision of the area, but let the enemy team start up the Baron first and tank the damage from it. You can continue to poke them, and then when they try to engage you, back off. Or, if they run away, you back off as well, but go into the nearby lane and look to pressure the turret. One of the biggest things when it comes to Baron is mid lane priority. Whoever is the team that has the wave pushing down mid lane has a large advantage when it comes to taking the Baron. The reason is, you have the best pivot out of Baron into pushing, or crossing mid lane to get the dragon afterward. If you're the team coming into the Baron pit, you'll almost always want to approach from the middle lane after shoving. Coming from the top side of the map may leave you chasing your opponents around the map, and they can go anywhere from there if they have mid lane. But it's much harder for the enemies to regroup and find a play if you have mid lane and they get pushed off into the Baron lane. Baron is an incredible objective for setting up split pushes around the lane furthest from it, and also setting up team fights. Every type of team composition can use Baron in some way. I mentioned poke compositions earlier, but team fighting ones can get the engage they want. Split pushing compositions can use it to stall and bait while their split pusher does all the work. Learning how to approach the Baron and use it to bring out the strengths of your composition via the setup is a great way to start improving your mid and late game. All of the objectives are core parts of the game and something you should be thinking about at all times, as well as devoting resources to. Like I said, it's not just about the Barons and Dragons, but small wins you can pick up like enemy jungle camps can add up over time and then begin to turn into larger and larger objectives for your team. Get more gold from jungle camps, be stronger than the enemy, fight them, win, grab dragons, get even stronger, fight again, grab Baron, win the game. You have to start small, and remember, every game has to have an early game, but not all games have a late game. So start focusing on how to get the snowball rolling, and you'll find that your mid game and late games will be much easier. Now we all like getting fed with kills, but remember that objectives get you guys wins. And like I said before, my favorite to go for is the Rift Herald, not necessarily because it's the best, but because I feel it's the most unique and I can choose how to use it and min-max it. But remember to write your go-to objective in the comments below. I'll read them while you guys go win some more games. I hope you take it easy, and I'll see you later. I'm Nathan Ng, and I am painfully single. That's going in the